Elise guided her hatchback along a gravel road that narrowed with every mile. The air smelled of cedar and rain-soaked leaves. No GPS. No signs. Just the map sent with her cabin rental, a black and white photocopy of an old forest survey, with the words, Cabin 12, do not follow GPS, scrawled in red ink. Of course it doesn't work, she muttered, phone screen dark in her palm. She turned off the radio. It had been nothing but static for the last 10 minutes anyway. Branches clawed at the sides of the car as she rounded the final bend. The trees suddenly gave way to a clearing, and there it was, a small, time-worn cabin with peeling white paint, a wraparound porch, and a rusted tin chimney leaning to one side. It sat just a few yards from the lake, which glistened like obsidian glass beneath the late afternoon sky. The wind had died down. The water didn't move. Elise shut off the engine and opened the door. The silence was immediate and deep. Even the forest held its breath. She grabbed her suitcase and a tote of groceries, climbing the porch steps. They groaned under her weight. One had a hairline crack. The key had been left under a mossy planter, just like the note said. It slid into the lock with surprising ease. The door creaked open. Inside, the cabin was small but cozy. Dust motes swirled in shafts of orange light. There was a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a single bedroom tucked off to the left. A few faded landscape paintings hung crookedly on the walls. She placed the groceries on the counter and looked around. A single landline phone hung on the wall by the front door, bright red, with a long coiled cord. Elise walked over and picked up the receiver. No dial tone. Just silence. She stared at the lake through the kitchen window. Its surface was still mirror flat. The kind of stillness that made you feel like something underneath was watching. Elise stood at the kitchen window longer than she meant to, staring into the lake's still surface. The water barely rippled. Even the surrounding pines looked frozen in place, as though captured in an old photograph. She shook herself free from the trance and turned away. The groceries went into creaky cabinets and a tiny fridge that buzzed quietly, like a nervous whisper. The fridge smelled faintly of mildew, but Elise ignored it. This was what she'd wanted, no distractions. Just quiet. She tossed her bag onto the bed and opened a nearby window. Cool air drifted in, carrying the scent of wet bark and earth. For a moment, it reminded her of camping with her father when she was young, before the arguments, before the silence, before he was gone. Just a weekend alone, she reminded herself. No work. No calls. No noise. She sat on the porch steps that evening, a mug of tea in hand, watching the sun sink behind the distant tree line. The lake reflected it perfectly, as if the sky bled into the water. Then the first sound broke the silence. Drip. She frowned. It came from behind her, inside the cabin. She stood and stepped back in. The sound repeated. Drip, drip. It was coming from the fireplace. Elise knelt and peered into the empty grate. The stone inside was dry. No logs, no ash, just a dusty iron grate and old soot. She listened. Nothing. She waited a beat longer, then shrugged and stood. Probably old pipes. She paused. No plumbing ran through the fireplace. With a nervous chuckle, she turned on the gas heater instead, welcoming its faint hum and clicking warmth. Later that night, she stood by the bedroom window, brushing her teeth. Outside, the moon had risen, pale and blurred behind thin clouds. She looked at the lake. And saw someone standing on the opposite shore. Too far to make out their features. No light. No boat. Just a dark, solitary shape, unmoving. She blinked. Gone. She leaned closer to the glass. Still gone. She climbed into bed and pulled the blanket up to her chin. The wind picked up. The trees outside creaked and groaned. And just as she began to drift off, she heard it again. A single drip, somewhere inside the cabin. The next morning brought no birdsong. Elise awoke to a room that felt colder than it should have. The gas heater still purred from the living room, but the chill clung to her like wet fabric. She sat up, blanket sliding from her shoulders, and looked toward the window. Fog. Thick, wet, and white, pressed against the glass like a suffocating sheet. She couldn't see the lake. Couldn't even see the porch railing. She wrapped herself in her coat and shuffled into the kitchen, flicking on the old coffee maker. It sputtered to life with a few grumbles and clicks. She watched the dark liquid trickle into the pot and leaned her hip against the counter. That's when she noticed the footprints. Just a few. Wet, slightly muddy. But they were inside. They led from the fireplace to the hallway. She froze, goosebumps rising on her arms. Her boots were by the front door, dry. The prints were bare, slender, and smeared, as though someone had walked through the cabin slowly, dragging their feet. Her breath caught. She followed the trail with cautious steps. It stopped just outside the bathroom, where the wooden floor darkened slightly with absorbed moisture. "Hello?" she called softly, half expecting a laugh or cough from some squatter hiding behind the door. Silence. She reached out, slowly pushed the bathroom door open. Nothing. Just a damp mirror, a threadbare towel, and a flickering bulb overhead. She checked every cabinet, every closet. The bedroom. Under the bed. Even the crawlspace hatch beneath the kitchen floor. Nothing. No sign of forced entry. No one there. Her coffee had gone cold by the time she returned to the kitchen. She sat at the table and stared at the fireplace. The stone looked darker than it had yesterday. Like something had soaked into it. She walked over and ran a finger across the stone. Wet. Slick. It smelled like algae and copper. Then, behind her, the red landline rang. She jumped, heart hammering. One ring. Then silence. She turned, walked over slowly, and picked it up. No dial tone. No static. But there was something else. A voice. Far away. Underwater. Elise. Her hand trembled. Then. "Let me out." Elise stood frozen with the receiver pressed to her ear. The voice, muffled, warbled, like it echoed from a great depth, hung in her mind like fog. She waited, heart racing, listening. Nothing else. Just a low hum. Not quite static. Not quite silence. She slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. Probably some crossed line, she whispered to herself, though her voice lacked conviction. Old cabins. Bad wiring. That's all. But her stomach turned. She wasn't sure what unnerved her more. The fact someone had said her name, or the fact they'd whispered, "Let me out." She grabbed her sweater and stepped onto the porch. The fog had begun to thin, though it still clung to the treetops and hovered low across the lake like a living thing. A splash echoed across the water. She flinched, peering into the haze. Nothing. The lake's surface remained perfectly still. No ripples. No birds overhead. Not even the distant hum of insects. It was as though the entire world had been muted. She stayed outside longer than she meant to, needing the fresh air, the open sky, even if it was wrapped in cloud and fog. When she returned inside, the fireplace caught her attention again. This time, it wasn't wet. It was scratched. Long, jagged lines etched into the stone just above the hearth, 4 of them, side by side. As though a hand had reached out and clawed downward. She crouched and ran her fingers over them. Fresh. The stone crumbled slightly under her touch. What the hell? she whispered, backing away slowly. She didn't remember seeing them yesterday. She would have remembered. She reached for her phone instinctively. Still no signal. No bars. Just the SOS symbol glaring at her like a warning. And then, from somewhere beneath the cabin, maybe the crawlspace, maybe deeper, came a faint, steady tapping. Like nails on wood. Tap. 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 Elise clenched her jaw. Mice, she said aloud. Or squirrels. But something in her bones told her otherwise. She went back to the kitchen, poured out the cold coffee, and stood over the sink. In the faint reflection of the window, she thought she saw movement behind her. She turned quickly, nothing there. Just the scratched fireplace, and the long, coiled cord of the red landline, swaying slightly. As though someone had brushed past it. By late afternoon, Elise had turned every light in the cabin on. It didn't help much. The bulbs were old and dim, casting pools of yellow warmth that seemed to retreat from corners and doorways. Shadows gathered easily in the cracks between floorboards and under furniture, thick as fog. She told herself she'd sleep better once she checked the crawlspace. It was probably just animals. Rodents. A raccoon maybe. That would explain the tapping. The sounds. Even the muddy footprints if she stretched her logic thin enough. Still, it took her a full hour to work up the nerve. The hatch sat beneath a faded throw rug near the kitchen table, a square panel of rough wood with a rusted metal ring. She knelt beside it, heart beating hard, and pulled the rug back. The wood was darker than she remembered. She wrapped her fingers around the ring and pulled. The hatch groaned open. A breath of cold, musty air met her, rising from below like the exhale of something that had been waiting. She aimed her flashlight into the hole. The crawlspace was shallow. Maybe 4 feet deep, filled with old leaves, dust, and cobwebs. Exposed beams ran in narrow rows beneath the floor. A tangle of wires and pipes clung to the underbelly of the house. But what drew her eye were the scratches. Not just beneath the fireplace now. They were everywhere. Dozens, hundreds, of long, uneven claw marks dug into the wooden beams. Some had gouged deep enough to splinter the wood. Her breath caught. And then she saw it. Near the far end of the crawlspace, almost hidden in shadow, a hole. A narrow, unnatural tunnel carved straight into the earth. The wood around its edge was blackened, damp, and crumbled like charred bark. The dirt beyond disappeared into darkness. Her flashlight flickered. She pulled it back and slammed the hatch shut. Hard. The sound echoed through the tiny cabin. She backed away, heart in her throat, and left the rug bunched up on the floor. Outside, the sun was beginning to set again. The fog returned, thicker than the night before, curling between trees like fingers dragging across skin. She checked the front door, locking the knob and deadbolt, then did the same for every window she could reach. When she passed the fireplace on her way to the bedroom, she saw something that stopped her cold. Another wet footprint. This one smaller than the others. Right in front of the hearth. Pointing toward the interior of the cabin. Elise didn't sleep that night. She lay curled in bed, every light on in the cabin. Her eyes stayed fixed on the crack beneath the door, watching for shadows, waiting for a second wet footprint to appear. At some point, hours past midnight, she heard it. A single knock on the front door. She sat up straight, the blanket clutched to her chest. Another knock. 3 slow raps. Knock, knock, knock. Not pounding. Not frantic. Polite. Like a visitor might knock when arriving too late, unsure if they were welcome. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. The cabin was dead silent except for the wind outside, soft, but rising. She thought of the lake. Of that shadow she'd seen on the opposite shore. Her stomach twisted. More knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Then a pause. Then. The doorknob jiggled, slow and deliberate. She gasped and covered her mouth with both hands. The front door was locked. She'd double-checked. Deadbolt, knob. She'd even pushed the bookshelf a few inches to brace it, not that it would stop anyone determined. The knob stopped turning. A long moment passed. Then a single word, muffled through the door. Elise. Soft. Wrong. As though it were being spoken underwater. She couldn't tell if it was male or female, young or old. Just, not right. She slid from the bed, as silently as she could, and crept to the window on the far side of the bedroom. It overlooked the front porch. Her breath fogged the glass as she leaned in to peek outside. Empty. No one there. Just the porch railing, wet with mist, and the trees in the distance swallowing the sky. She turned back toward the hall, heart hammering in her ears. The door didn't knock again. The knob didn't turn. But on the wall near the phone, scratched deep into the wallpaper, were 4 crooked words that hadn't been there the night before. You opened the door. Elise didn't sleep at all. The message on the wall stared back at her until morning. You opened the door. She hadn't. Not literally. But somehow, it felt true. When dawn finally bled across the treetops, she walked toward the message with slow steps. The scratches were jagged, torn deep through the wallpaper into the wood beneath. Not a trick of the light. Not sleep deprivation. It was real. She reached out, touched one of the letters with trembling fingers. The edge of the W cut her fingertip. She stepped back, startled, and glanced toward the fireplace. More wet footprints. They trailed across the living room floor. 2 steps, then 4, then vanished before the kitchen. She followed them in silence. And there, dangling from the wall-mounted landline, was the phone's receiver. Off the hook. She hadn't touched it since last night. The long red cord twisted around itself like a noose, spiraling slowly as though someone had just let it go. The phone speaker crackled softly. She leaned in, pressing her ear close. Faint breathing. Not hers. Not human. It gurgled, wet and low, as if coming through lungs filled with lake water. Then, again. Elise. She slammed the receiver down and took a step back. The click echoed louder than it should have. This place wasn't just weird. It was watching her. Studying her. She turned to the bookshelf beside the fireplace. Most of the spines were faded. Old mysteries, field guides, weathered journals. She pulled one out at random, Wildlife and Weather of the Deep Pines. But behind it, wedged into the shadows at the back of the shelf, was something different. A notebook. Black. Water damaged. No title. She opened it. Inside, the pages were warped and smeared, but readable. The handwriting was tight and frantic, slanted across the page. Day 1. Something is in the lake. I saw it. The water moved when there was no wind. I think it waits until dark. Day 4. I heard it whisper my name. It sounded like my mother, but she's been dead 6 years. Day 7. The crawlspace is not a crawlspace. It goes deeper. I don't know how far. It's not just earth under there. Elise turned the page and her breath caught in her throat. There, scrawled in thick black ink. Don't listen when it knocks. Elise sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the journal open in her lap, flashlight clutched tight in one hand. The words scratched across the warped pages clawed at her thoughts like brambles. The entries became more erratic the deeper she read. Day 10. It left something in the fireplace. I burned it. I think it liked that. Day 13. I found the bone under the floorboards. It was warm to the touch. I buried it again. I don't think that was the right thing to do. Day 16. The water rose last night. It touched the porch. I didn't hear rain. I didn't hear wind. I only heard it. She flipped through the final pages. They were torn, soaked with ink. Illegible. No name signed. No date. Just a frantic, spiraling descent into madness. Or truth. She stared at the fireplace. Against every instinct, she stood and walked toward it. The stone was cold, slick with moisture. A dark smear ran along the grate, nearly black in the low light. She knelt, inspecting it. Ash. Not old. Fresh. Someone had burned something here recently. She reached into the grate and brushed her fingers along the char. Something sharp pricked her thumb. She hissed and withdrew her hand. Nestled beneath the ash was a small, brittle object. A tooth. Not human. Too long. Yellowed. The root twisted like a knot of seaweed. Its surface was etched with tiny, impossible grooves, like runes or symbols made by something that doesn't write. She dropped it instantly. A sound echoed from under the cabin. Tap. 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 But this time, it wasn't steady. It was rhythmic. Patterned. Almost like Morse code. She scrambled to the shelf, grabbed a notepad and pen, and began to jot it down as the taps continued. She flipped through the notebook, checked her phone's offline notes, looked up the translation. It spelled opium. She stepped back. Tap. 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 The final series was slower. One letter. I. Open I. Or. Open it. A gust of wind slammed against the side of the cabin, hard enough to rattle the window panes. The lights flickered and dimmed. And somewhere outside, the front porch creaked under the weight of something heavy, slowly moving toward the door. Elise didn't know how long she stood frozen, heart hammering in her chest as the porch groaned under invisible weight. The wind howled through the pines like a wounded animal, rattling the windows. The tap-tap-tap on the walls slowed to a hollow silence. She gripped the flashlight tighter, moving toward the front door with careful, measured steps. Every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet sounded like thunder. She reached the door, hand trembling as she reached for the lock. Should I? The thought hit like a bullet. Open it and see? Leave it shut and wait for dawn? Her skin prickled with cold sweat. She knew the answer. The knocking started again. Knock. Knock. Soft, deliberate. But beneath it, something else, a rasping, like breath drawn through water. Elise. The voice again. Not a voice. A whisper. Her fingers froze on the lock. Suddenly, the porch light flickered on, though she was sure there wasn't a bulb there. The porch outside was drenched in a sickly pale glow. She peered through the peephole. Empty. No footsteps. No figure. Just the wet porch boards, glistening under the eerie light. A sudden clatter from the back of the cabin startled her. She spun, swinging the flashlight beam toward the kitchen window. There, in the reflection, she thought she saw eyes. Dark, unblinking. Staring back at her. She blinked hard. Gone. Her breath caught in her throat. She backed away from the door, the flashlight shaking in her hand. What did that journal say? She thought. Don't listen when it knocks. And yet, the knocking persisted. Knock. 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 Slow, steady. Tap. Tap. Her mind screamed at her to ignore I. It was slightly ajar. A faint draft wafted from the narrow gap between the books and the wall. She never remembered seeing it like that before. Hands shaking, she reached out and pushed the shelf. It swung open slowly, revealing a narrow staircase descending into pitch darkness. Cold air escaped the opening, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. Elise swallowed hard. The journal's warnings echoed in her mind. The crawlspace is not a crawlspace. It goes deeper. She hesitated, then grabbed a candle from the mantelpiece and lit it. The flame flickered weakly but steady. Steeling herself, she stepped onto the staircase. Each creaking step descended into cold silence. At the bottom, the air was thick and heavy, smelling of wet soil and something metallic. The narrow tunnel stretched ahead, walls slick with moss and roots. A faint light pulsed from somewhere far off. As she advanced, whispers rose around her. Low voices in a language she couldn't understand, tangled with the distant drip of water. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a cavernous space beneath the cabin. The walls glistened with wet stone, and in the center lay a shallow pool, black as oil. Ripples danced across the surface, though there was no breeze. And just beneath the water, something moved. Something alive. Elise froze, her breath caught in her throat as the water began to bubble and shift. The black pool rippled as Elise stood motionless at the cavern's edge. The candle in her hand hissed faintly, wax sliding down the side in trembling beads. Its flame dimmed with every breath she took, like the very air around her resisted light. Then, a shape. Rising just beneath the surface. Long, slender. Not quite human. She stepped back, barely breathing, the toes of her boots scraping across the slick stone. The water stilled. The whispers, once faint, grew louder. They circled her like wind through dead reeds, weaving through the cavern walls. One voice, familiar, cut through the others. Elise. She turned quickly. No one behind her. But another whisper answered, right beside her ear. It's waiting. The candle guttered. She held it higher, sweeping its light across the chamber. And then she saw them, bones. Dozens. Scattered along the far wall. Ribs and femurs, long decayed, tangled in what looked like fishing nets and scraps of soaked clothing. One skull lay half submerged, jaw open in a frozen scream, moss trailing from its eye socket. She gagged, staggering back. Her foot slipped. She nearly tumbled into the pool, but caught herself, fingers scraping the edge of the stone rim. The candle slipped from her hand and dropped into the black water. There was a hiss, then silence. Darkness swallowed the chamber whole. She scrambled backward, palms stinging, heart in her throat. From the center of the pool came a sound. A single breath. Wet, drawn from lungs that hadn't tasted air in years. And then, the water spoke. Elise. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a voice, her own. Mimicked perfectly. Dragged upward from the depths. It spoke again, more words forming now, choking with water. You, let, me, in. The surface rippled violently. She ran. Scrambling up the stairs, tripping over herself, she fled through the hidden doorway, shoved the bookshelf closed behind her, and braced her back against it. The cabin was silent once more. Except for the steady drip, drip, coming from the fireplace. Elise sat on the floor, back pressed hard against the hidden door, heart hammering like a war drum in her chest. The candle was gone. Her hands were scraped raw, knees bruised from the stone steps. She stared across the living room. The fireplace now glistened in the low morning light. Not from soot or water this time. From blood. It ran in slow rivulets from the hearthstones, seeping between the floorboards, too red, too thick to be imagined. The metallic tang hit her nose and turned her stomach. She rose shakily to her feet, backed away toward the kitchen. And that's when she saw it. The bathroom mirror. Words scratched into the fogged glass. I never left. She turned slowly to the hallway mirror, already knowing what she'd find. A single wet handprint. Small. Child-sized. She ran to the sink, splashed her face, trying to snap herself out of the waking nightmare. But when she looked down, she screamed. Etched into her forearm, red and raw like it had been burned into her skin, was a symbol. A circle. Inside, a jagged X. She scrubbed at it, soap and water and nail brushing at her own flesh, but it wouldn't go. It wasn't just drawn. It was there, seared beneath the skin. She stumbled backward and hit the pantry door. It creaked open. Inside, stacked behind cans of beans and old soup tins, were more notebooks. At least 6. All black. All water-damaged. All filled with the same writing. A single phrase repeated over and over on the first pages of each one. The lake does not forget. She flipped through one. Then another. Every entry seemed written by someone different, different hands, different voices, but the same descent. The same madness. The same thing watching from the water. In the last one, dated 5 years prior, a note was paperclipped inside. If you're reading this, you've already heard it. If you've heard it, it knows your name. Do not let it inside your head. The man in the water is not a man. Elise slammed the notebook shut and ran outside. But the lake was gone. In its place was only fog. And the sound of water dripping steadily from the porch ceiling, though nothing was above her but sky. Elise stood barefoot on the porch, staring into the white nothing where the lake had once stretched out in still, silent beauty. Now it was gone. Or, hidden. No water lapped at the shore. No birds flew overhead. There was no sound but the drip, drip, drip from above, a sound without source, echoing in a rhythm that felt intentional. She stepped down into the yard. The grass was damp. Cold. Each blade clung to her ankles like fingers. She turned in a slow circle. The trees were shadows now. Tall, still silhouettes looming through the mist. She could just make out the cabin behind her, its windows dark, like hollow eyes. Then, from the fog, something emerged. A figure. Far off at first, no more than a blur in the haze. But walking. Slowly. Toward her. Her mouth went dry. It looked human, tall, shoulders hunched. Its feet dragged across the ground with long, scraping steps. She took a step back. The figure moved faster. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned and ran. Back up the porch. Through the door. She slammed it shut and threw the bolt. Silence. She backed away, her chest heaving. Then, the figure knocked. Not on the door. On the glass behind her. She whirled around. Nothing. But the windowpane bore a mark. Fogged with breath. A shape drawn into the condensation. A circle with a jagged X. The same one on her arm. She fell to her knees, sobbing now. Whatever it wasn't just a ghost. It wasn't just here. It was inside her now. She looked up, and saw movement in the reflection of the microwave door. A face. Pale. Stretched. Watery eyes wide and milky. Floating just behind her shoulder. She turned. Nothing. Just the kitchen. Still. Empty. But her own reflection, it lingered half a second too long after she moved. Then it smiled. Elise stumbled back from the microwave, knocking over a chair in her panic. She didn't scream. The scream was still inside her, like everything else now. She clutched her arms tightly and sank to the floor, heart hammering, eyes wide and locked on the reflective surface. The face had moved. It had grinned at her. But not a human grin. A split in the skin, too wide. A mouth filled not with teeth, but with black water and whispers. Then, all at once, she was somewhere else. Not in the kitchen. Not in the cabin. In the lake. Standing waist deep. It was night. The water lapped gently around her, but it was warm, thick, like it had flesh of its own. Fog rolled across the surface. She was holding something. No, someone. A child. A little girl, maybe 7, arms limp in Elisa's grasp. She stared down into the girl's pale face, and suddenly, recognition struck her like a hammer. She knew this girl. Even though she had no memory of ever seeing her before. The girl's lips moved. "Why did you leave me?" Then her eyes opened, pure white, and her mouth split wide into an impossible scream that turned to water and surged into Elisa's lungs. She gasped, choking. Reality snapped back. She was in the kitchen again, hands grasping the tile floor, coughing uncontrollably. She fell onto her side, struggling for air, and coughed up a mouthful of lake water, thick and black, pooling around her like ink. She stared at it, horrified. And saw something move within the puddle. A face. Her own. Mouth opening. And from the liquid reflection, her voice echoed once more. "Elise, we're waiting." The puddle slowly soaked into the grout, but the face lingered. Elise couldn't look away. Her reflection in the water blinked, even though she hadn't. Then, finally, it vanished, sucked downward as though the floor itself had inhaled. She crawled away from it, grabbing the edge of the counter to pull herself up. The cabin groaned around her. A long, low creak. Not wood settling. Not temperature shifts. It was breathing. The walls expanded ever so slightly with the sound, like lungs drawing air. When she touched the nearest one, it felt warm. Pulsing. "Elise." She spun. The voice was coming from the crawlspace hatch again. Of course it was. She approached it slowly. The rug had been pushed aside by something, not by her. The hatch itself sat slightly ajar, a cold wind blowing upward through the crack. She hesitated. "Don't open it," her mind pleaded. She opened it. The smell hit her first, thick and rotting, like wet meat and pondweed. Then the sound, not the taps anymore, but a faint scratching, like fingernails against stone. She aimed her flashlight down. The tunnel had changed. It was bigger. No longer just a crawlspace. The wooden beams were warped and pushed outward, the walls bulging like something enormous had passed through. She stared, hand trembling on the edge of the hatch. A hand reached up. Pale. Slim. Wet. Fingers long and too thin. Nails broken. Wrinkled. It gripped the floorboard. Then a second hand. Slowly, something began to pull itself up. Elise screamed and slammed the hatch closed, throwing her full weight on it. She grabbed the rug and dragged a chair on top. Then a second. Then the heavy trunk from beside the fireplace. Thud. From underneath. Thud, thud. A wet moan. Then silence. She backed away, breathing hard. The walls pulsed again. And all the pictures on the walls, landscapes, birds, trees, had changed. Now they all showed the same thing. A cabin, half sunk in water, with a figure watching from the lake. Its eyes were black. Its mouth was open. And it wore her face. Elise ran to the red landline phone. She didn't know who she'd call. She just needed a voice. A sound. A tether. The receiver was cold and slick in her hand. She pressed it to her ear. No dial tone. But there was sound. Static, not the normal kind, but deep, layered, alive. It wasn't white noise. It was whispering. Words half-formed, phrases stretched too far, voices drowning in themselves. She held the phone away, but still heard it. Faint, like it was in her teeth. Then one voice emerged from the hiss. Elise. She froze. The voice was clearer now. More urgent. Familiar. It sounded like her mother. Elise, listen to me, it said, cracking with distortion. Don't go into the lake. It isn't water. It remembers. It never lets go. The line cut. She stared at the phone. A beep. Just one. Then silence. Then dripping from the receiver itself, black, oily water leaking down the cord. She dropped it, the receiver swinging like a pendulum. Behind her, every window in the cabin shattered at once. Crash. The wind howled in through jagged glass. Curtains flailed. Dust swirled. The lake had come inside. She ducked, arms over her head. Then she looked up. In every frame of broken glass, the windows, the microwave, the dark TV screen, she saw them. Faces. Pale. Reaching. Drowned. Dozens of them. Some she recognized from the notebooks. Others she didn't. One of them looked exactly like her. It pressed a hand to the inside of the broken windowpane. It mouthed the words. Let me in. Then it smiled. Elise ran to the back of the cabin. Shattered glass crunched underfoot as wind screamed through the windows. The forest outside was no longer silent, the trees bent and groaned, as if whispering in voices older than wind. She collapsed in the hallway, gripping her head. Something was inside her thoughts. Pushing. Whispers threaded through her mind like vines. You called us. You opened the door. You brought us back. She gasped and clawed at her arms, the skin there itched, burned. She pulled back her sleeve. The symbol had changed. The circle and X were still there, but now a second mark curled beneath it. A spiral. A line drawn downward, like a hook descending into water. Suddenly, the lights surged, not on, but inward. The bulbs swelled with a sickly blue glow, then went black, leaving behind thin trails of smoke. Elise staggered into the bathroom. The mirror was fogged again. But this time, it didn't reflect her. The woman staring back was similar, but wrong. Her hair hung limp, soaked. Her eyes were all pupil. Her skin was a patchwork of pale rot and bruising. She reached forward from the other side of the glass. Then pushed through. The glass rippled like liquid. Elise screamed and stumbled backward into the hallway, slamming the door. The hallway stretched. She turned to run, but it was longer than it should have been. The doors were farther away, stretching like the walls of a nightmare. And from beneath the floorboards came a chant. Dozens of voices. Not Latin. Not English. They were speaking in the language of water. It sounded like drowning. Elise covered her ears, but it didn't help. The words moved through her bones, pressed behind her eyes, scraped her thoughts. And then it stopped. A single voice rose in their place. A voice smooth as silk, old as rot. Come home, Elise. She fell to her knees. Behind her, the crawlspace hatch creaked open on its own. The hatch yawned wide at the base of the hallway, cold air breathing out like fog from a crypt. Elise stared at it. Something called from beneath, not with words this time, but with memory. She could feel them, echoes of moments that didn't belong to her. A lantern swaying from a boat. A hand slipping beneath the surface. A scream muffled by mud and black water. Her feet moved before she could stop them. One step. Then another. The air grew colder with each footfall, and the light behind her faded until it felt like she was moving backward into night. The tunnel was wider now, stone, not earth. The walls pulsed with veins of something wet and glowing, like faint blue algae. She didn't need her flashlight. The path lit itself. Roots hung from the ceiling like strands of hair, brushing her face. The tunnel curved down. Deeper. Until finally, it opened. A vast underground chamber greeted her. At its center was the lake. Again, only now it was below. Still. Black. Silent. Around its edge stood shapes. Not people. Not anymore. Tall, stretched things in ragged clothes. Skin bloated and pale. Eyes gone. Their mouths hung open, not screaming, not breathing, just waiting. Elise stepped closer. They parted as she approached, silently moving aside to let her pass. They recognized her. At the center of the lake, a stone platform rose above the surface, ancient, slick with moss and carvings too old for language. And there, standing on the platform, was herself. But not. This version of Elise was wet, water dripping endlessly from her fingertips. Her skin shimmered like scales. Her hair floated around her head like she was submerged in a tide that wasn't there. The reflection smiled. Finally, it said, voice like stone dragging through mud. "You've come back." Elise shook her head. "No. I'm not." But the words failed her. Because she remembered. The girl in the water. The journal. The hands reaching up. The call in the static. She had opened the door. Years ago. She just didn't remember doing it. Until now. Elise stood at the edge of the black underground lake, her breath fogging in the damp air. Her reflection, the other Elise, waited silently on the platform, the water dripping from her forming perfect circles that never spread, never faded. "You don't remember," the reflection said, cocking her head. Elise stared, shaking. "I've never been here before." "You have." It stepped forward without splashing, barefoot on stone, eyes never leaving Elise's. "You came here when you were a child. You found the cabin. Wandered too close to the water. You heard the voice. No. You went in. You didn't come out." Elise took a step back. "That's not possible." The drowned version smiled wider, and it was awful. Her mouth split from ear to ear like torn paper, water pouring from the corners like ink from an overfull pen. "You've been echoing ever since." The platform behind her rippled. Something moved beneath the water. Slowly. Lovingly. A shape began to rise. A hunched figure, with skin like moss, limbs too long, fingers jointed in reverse. A head with no face, only a deep, black slit where eyes should have been. The drowned Elise stepped aside, gesturing toward it. "The man in the water," she whispered. "He found you. He marked you. He made you one of us. You've just been pretending to be whole." The figure reached the shore, dripping and blind. Its head turned toward Elise. And she remembered. A birthday. Age 7. Her father fishing on Mercer Lake. Elise stepping away from the fire pit. A sound in the water. A ripple. A voice saying her name. So soft. So familiar. She walked into the lake with bare feet. The stars blurred. The air grew thick. Her last thought had been, "It sounds like Mom." Back in the underground chamber, Elise fell to her knees. "No," she whispered, clutching her chest. "No, I got out. I left. I'm real. I have a life." "You're an echo," said the reflection. "You always were." And from behind the man in the water, more figures began to rise. Every one of them with her face. They emerged from the black water in silence. 6, no, 7 of them. Why me? Elise whispered. Why any of us? The reflection didn't answer immediately. Instead, she knelt by the water and dipped her fingers into the surface. The ripples that spread weren't circular, they bent, warped, forming letters. A message. We were never meant to be alone. Elise swallowed hard. The lake is alive, she said aloud, not even sure if it was a question anymore. No, the reflection said. It's a memory. Elise's skin prickled. It doesn't think the way you do. Doesn't want the way you want. It remembers. Everyone who dies in it leaves an echo. Sometimes that echo finds a way back. You were strong enough to walk away. The air in the chamber grew colder. But that strength, the reflection said, voice softening, comes with a price. Behind them, the man in the water rose to full height. Towering. Shapeless. It spoke now, not in words, but in a sound that forced itself into Elise's skull. Images. Impressions. A woman screaming in the water. A child watching from the trees. A ripple, circling back, again, and again. It wasn't speaking. It was showing her her own past. You didn't escape, the reflection said. You were sent back. Elise's mouth opened. But the words she wanted to say were already being said by someone else. Behind her. In her voice. An eighth Elise had appeared, this one identical, trembling, gasping for breath. The real Elise. Still drowning. Still caught. The eighth Elise stumbled forward, her eyes wide with terror. Her breath came in ragged gasps, chest heaving as if she had just surfaced from the depths. She looked from the lake, to the mirror-like surface of the underground water, to the pale figures surrounding her. Who are you? She whispered, voice cracking. We are you, the drowned reflection answered calmly, stepping toward her. You are the one who left the water, but not completely. You are caught between what you were, and what you are becoming. The figures shifted, faces flickering like dying flames, eyes hollow but shining. Elise felt a cold hand grip her shoulder, but when she spun around, no one was there. The voice whispered again, inside her head. Come home. She fought it, shaking her head fiercely. No. I'm not yours. But the cavern seemed to pulse in response, the water rippling with a dark hunger. The man in the water knelt, head bowed, and from the black pool rose tendrils, thin and writhing like seaweed, but alive. They wrapped slowly around her ankles, cold and unyielding. She tried to pull free. The tendrils tightened. Her vision blurred. Voices echoed, fragments of memories not her own. A lullaby sung by a mother who never held her. A birthday party drowned by rain and silence. A voice calling her name from the lake's dark heart. Her struggle slowed, and then stopped. Elise sank to her knees, tears mixing with water that wasn't rain. She looked up at the reflection that smiled back, knowing. You cannot leave, it said gently. Not now. Not ever. The underground lake surface shimmered and then broke open. A hand reached out, pale and dripping. And Elise took it. Elise's fingers closed around the cold, wet hand. The touch was ice and velvet, soft, yet unyielding. The cavern shifted around her as she was pulled closer to the water's edge. The other Elises watched silently, their faces blank but eyes shining with a sorrow that felt older than time. She wanted to scream, to pull away. But her body betrayed her. Step by step, she moved forward until her knees touched the slick stone. The water lapped hungrily at her skin. Her reflection smiled again, no longer the terrified girl, but the patient guardian of the lake's secrets. You carry our memories now, it whispered. Elise, you are the bridge. The water reached her waist. The voices in her mind grew louder, a chorus of echoes blending together. We were lost. We were forgotten. You remember for us. Elise closed her eyes. A heavy weight settled on her chest, not physical, but ancient and endless. She was no longer just a girl. She was the sum of all the lost souls tangled in Mercer Lake's depths. 1,000 voices whispered in her ear, their grief and longing washing over her like waves. Her lungs burned. She opened her eyes beneath the water and saw the faces of the drowned staring back. They were waiting. For her. To join. To remember. To never leave. The water closed over Elisa's head. Cold and suffocating. She fought to breathe, but the voices inside her lungs sang louder. Remember. 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 Memories not her own swirled around her like dark fish, faces, names, stories that blurred into one. She saw a little girl lost in the woods, reaching for a hand that was never there. A father's scream muffled beneath cold waves. A mother's lullaby drowned by the night. Each memory stabbed at her heart, filling her with pain and sorrow so deep it felt like drowning in grief itself. And yet, through it all, she understood. The lake was not a curse. It was a memory, a place where all the forgotten and lost were kept alive, held in the water's endless embrace. She was their voice. Their echo. The link between what was and what is. Elise opened her eyes underwater and met the gaze of the man in the water. Its black slit where eyes should have been pulsed with ancient knowledge. It spoke, not with words, but with feeling. You are home. And in that moment, Elise ceased to struggle. She became the lake. The memory. The whisper beneath the surface. The man in the water. Time had no meaning on the lake. Elise drifted beneath the surface, weightless and endless. She was everywhere and nowhere. Her thoughts flowed like the water, deep, dark, and infinite. But something stirred. A ripple. A faint pulse. Above her, the surface broke. A pair of eyes blinked open. A young woman, soaked and shivering, gasping for air. Elise watched from below, feeling the echo of her old self. The woman pulled herself from the water onto the mossy shore. She was the next. The cycle. The keeper. The bridge. Elise reached out with tendrils of memory and shadow, brushing the woman's mind. The woman's breath caught. Her eyes widened with recognition she didn't understand. The lake whispered. A name. The name was Elise. The woman shivered, pulling a wet strand of hair from her face. She glanced behind her, searching the thick fog that wrapped the lake like a shroud. But the forest was silent. Too silent. A voice echoed, not from the trees, but inside her mind. Elise. Her heart raced. She stumbled toward the cabin, boots squelching in the mud. Inside, dust motes floated in fractured sunlight, but the air was thick and cold. On the kitchen table lay an old, water-damaged journal. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. The pages fluttered open, revealing frantic scrawls. The lake does not forget. You are not alone. He waits beneath. A chill ran down her spine. Outside, the wind shifted. The water rippled. And the shadow beneath the surface moved closer. The woman sat heavily at the cracked wooden table, the journal open before her. Her fingers trembled as she traced the faded ink, words that seemed both distant and immediate. The lake remembers. It calls to those who listen. The water is not water. It is memory and hunger. Those who answer never leave. A sudden noise made her start, a soft tapping at the window. She turned, heart pounding. The fog outside swirled unnaturally, thickening as if alive. The tapping became a knock. Slow. Patient. Knock. Knock. Her breath hitched. The knocking seemed to echo from the trees, yet it felt closer, right behind her. She spun around. No one. But on the wall, a wet handprint appeared. Small. Childlike. She stepped forward, feeling a chill press against her skin. The words in the journal replayed in her mind. Do not listen when it knocks. Outside, the lake shimmered in the fog, and just beneath the surface, dark shapes moved, watching. The knock came again, soft, deliberate, like a slow heartbeat against the cabin walls. The woman pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, eyes darting to every shadow. Outside, the fog pressed close, blurring the boundary between earth and water. She wanted to ignore it, but the sound burrowed into her mind, a persistent echo. She rose slowly, every step heavy with dread, and moved toward the front door. Her hand trembled on the handle. The knocking stopped. Silence. Then, from behind the door, a voice, low, rasping, but unmistakably her own. Elise. She froze. The air grew thick, the temperature dropping rapidly. A chill ran down her spine. Her breath misted in the cold air as she pulled back from the door. Behind her, the cabin creaked, as if something was moving inside the walls. The knock came again, this time on the window. She turned. A small, pale handprint pressed against the glass. And just beyond the fog, eyes stared back. That night, Elise lay awake, every creak and sigh of the cabin magnified in the dark. The fog outside thickened, swallowing the world beyond the windows. The knocking never ceased, shifting to scratches, soft, deliberate, running along the wooden walls. She pulled the covers tighter around her, heart pounding. A whisper brushed past her ear. Elise. Her breath caught. She sat up, scanning the shadows. The voice was inside her head now, urgent, familiar, and impossible to ignore. It spoke words she didn't want to hear. Remember the lake. Remember the water. Remember us. Suddenly, the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. A cold mist seeped from the cracks in the floorboards. Elisa's eyes widened as pale fingers reached from beneath the floor, grasping for her ankles. She screamed, pulling free and stumbling into the hallway. The fog poured in through the broken windows, thick and suffocating. Outside, the lake's surface shimmered with dark ripples, as if something just beneath was watching, waiting. Elise stumbled down the hallway, breath ragged, heart pounding like thunder in her chest. Behind her, the scratching grew louder, nails scraping wood, slow and deliberate. She reached the staircase, but the steps twisted and stretched, lengthening beyond reason. Each footfall echoed unnaturally, the sound swallowing itself in the thick fog that crept in beneath the doorframes. At the bottom, the basement hatch yawned open. A cold, black mist poured upward, tendrils curling like smoke, reaching for her legs. She tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. Her legs froze. The tendrils wrapped around her ankles, pulling tight. She fought, desperate to break free, but the mist held her fast. From the darkness, a voice whispered. You are ours. You always were. The walls around her seemed to pulse, alive with watching eyes. Her vision blurred. The last thing she saw before surrendering was a pale hand, reaching from the mist, a hand that bore the same jagged X as the mark on her arm. Darkness swallowed Elise whole. She drifted between moments, neither awake nor asleep, lost in a void of cold water and endless whispers. The voices inside her mind grew louder, stronger. They were no longer whispers. They were commands. Remember. Join us. You are ours. Her body felt heavy, as if filled with water. Her skin grew cold, pale. The jagged X on her arm pulsed with dark light. She opened her mouth to scream, but only silence came. In the blackness, she saw faces, countless faces. They were hers. And yet, they were not. They reached out. She reached back. The last thread of herself snapped. Elise became the lake. The memory. The eternal echo. Dawn broke over Mercer Lake, pale light spilling through the heavy fog. The water was still, but beneath the surface, something stirred. A figure appeared at the edge of the shore. A young woman, soaked and trembling, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. She clutched a small backpack to her chest, unsure of where she was, or how she had come to be here. The cabin loomed behind her, dark and silent. She took a hesitant step forward. The lake whispered her name. She shivered. And took another step. The young woman, still shivering, brushed damp hair from her face. Her breath caught as she spotted the cabin's door, slightly ajar, creaking softly with the breeze. A soft voice whispered from within the shadows. Elise. Her name. But it wasn't her name. She stepped closer, drawn by something she couldn't explain. Inside, a journal lay open on a dusty table. The pages fluttered as if stirred by an unseen hand. She read the scrawled words aloud. The lake remembers all who enter. It keeps them close, whispers their names, waits for the next. Outside, the fog thickened. The water's surface shimmered. And from the depths, something moved, watching. Waiting. The woman closed the journal, heart pounding. A chill wind whispered through the cabin, carrying a voice that seemed to echo inside her head. Come to the water. Her skin prickled. She looked toward the window, where the lake lay shrouded in mist. The water's surface rippled, as if beckoning. Her feet moved almost without her will. Outside, the ground was cold and wet beneath her bare toes. The forest seemed to hold its breath. She stepped closer to the lake, feeling the dark water reach out like fingers. Her reflection shimmered on the surface. For a moment, she saw not herself, but a face pale and cracked, staring back. She blinked. The face vanished. A whisper echoed in her mind. You're one of us now. The woman's footsteps slowed, heart hammering in her chest. The lake stretched out before her like a black mirror, cold and endless. Fog curled around her ankles, chilling her skin. She knelt at the water's edge, fingertips brushing the smooth surface. Ripples spread, distorting her reflection. The pale face returned, eyes hollow and knowing. Her breath caught. Behind her, a voice whispered from the trees. Elise, come home. She shivered, unsure if the sound was real or in her mind. The lake's surface bubbled softly. A hand reached up from the depths, pale and trembling. Her fingers grazed the water. The pull was sudden, strong, like the tide pulling her in. She tried to pull back. But it was too late. The lake was already claiming her. The cold water wrapped around her fingers like silk and ice. Her heart raced as the pull deepened, dragging her closer. Panic surged, but her limbs felt heavy, slow, as if sinking into quicksand. Voices whispered, rising in a haunting chorus. Remember. 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 Her reflection fractured on the rippling surface. Faces emerged from the depths, pale, sorrowful, and countless. They reached toward her, hands outstretched, beckoning. A voice, soft and familiar, echoed in her mind. You belong to us now. The lake's pull grew irresistible. Her knees buckled. Cold darkness enveloped her. She was slipping beneath the surface. The world above faded. Silence replaced the whispering voices. Coldness became a heavy shroud. Elisa's lungs screamed for air, but the water filled her, filling every space inside. She drifted deeper into darkness. Shapes swirled around her, faces from the past, eyes wide and accusing. A hand touched her shoulder. It was soft, yet unyielding. A voice, her own, echoed through the void. Remember. Images flooded her mind. A girl lost in the woods. A cabin by the lake. A mark burned into her skin. The lake was not just water. It was memory. It was home. Elise understood. She was part of it now. Forever. Elise's consciousness merged with the lake's endless memory. She was no longer just herself. She was all of them. Every lost soul. Every whispered name. The lake's cold fingers wrapped around her mind, binding her with ancient promises. A voice echoed deep within her. You are the keeper now. The bridge between worlds. The memory and the forgotten. She felt a weight settle on her chest, heavy but comforting. A whisper danced in her ear. Remember, Elise. Remember, so no one else will be lost. Her eyes opened beneath the surface, glowing faintly. She reached out with trembling fingers. The water rippled. And the cycle began again. Time had lost meaning beneath the lake's surface. Elise floated in the depths, weightless and infinite. Around her, the faces of the lost whispered softly, their sorrowful songs weaving through the water. She was their guardian now, their memory, their voice. Her eyes, glowing faintly, scanned the endless blackness. In the distance, the man in the water stirred, a shadow among shadows. It watched, patient and silent. Elise knew her duty. To hold the echoes. To keep the cycle unbroken. Above, the surface shimmered. New footsteps approached the shore. The cycle was beginning anew. A figure emerged from the fog, boots sinking into the damp earth. The air was thick and cold. The woman paused, eyes wide with unease as she approached the cabin. Her breath formed clouds in the chilly morning air. Elise watched from beneath the surface, her glowing eyes fixed on the newcomer. The woman hesitated at the cabin's doorstep, fingers trembling as she reached for the handle. Inside, a journal lay open, waiting. The lake rippled softly. A whisper caressed the newcomer's mind. Elise. The woman shivered, the name stirring something deep and forgotten. She stepped inside. The cycle began once more. The woman flipped open the journal, breath trembling. Her eyes scanned the faded words. The lake remembers all who listen. A chill skittered down her spine as a soft tapping echoed behind her. She turned sharply, only the still cabin greeted her. Outside, the fog thickened, curling like fingers around the windows. Elisa's glowing eyes watched from beneath the lake's surface, waiting. The voice whispered again inside the woman's mind. Remember. You belong. A shadow moved just beyond the trees. The man in the water waited patiently. The cycle was unbroken. The tapping grew louder, steady, insistent, echoing through the cabin's empty rooms. The woman's breath hitched as the walls seemed to breathe with her heartbeat. A soft voice slipped into her mind. Elise. Her fingers trembled, clutching the journal tighter. Outside, the lake's surface rippled as if beckoning. The air grew thick with cold fog. The woman's feet moved of their own accord, drawing her toward. But the fog closed in, thick and suffocating. The lake was watching. Waiting. And the cycle was unbroken. The woman's breath came in shallow gasps as the fog thickened around her. Her feet sank into the soft mud at the lake's edge. The water shimmered with unnatural light. The faces beneath the surface pressed upward, mouths opening in silent cries. Her fingers trembled as she reached out again. A whisper floated on the cold breeze. You belong. She closed her eyes. The water rose to meet her. Slowly. Inevitable. Her body gave in. And beneath the surface, Elise watched, the eternal keeper, the endless watcher. The cycle had come full circle. The water enveloped the woman, cold and silent. Her screams were swallowed by the depths. Elise reached out with ghostly hands, pulling the new arrival into the endless dark. Faces flickered around them, echoes of the past, waiting for their voices to be heard again. The lake pulsed with ancient memory. A voice whispered through the water. "You are home." Elise's eyes gleamed as she embraced her fate. She was the keeper. The memory. The whisper beneath the surface. The cycle would never end. Years passed, or maybe moments. Time had no meaning beneath Mercer Lake. Elise floated, a pale sentinel in the cold depths. Above, the surface shimmered with moonlight. Suddenly, a crack appeared, a thin fracture running through the black mirror of the water. The faces beneath it twisted, warping and writhing. Elise felt a pulse, a tremor in the memory she kept. The cycle was breaking. Above the lake, a storm gathered, lightning splitting the sky. A new figure approached the shore, unaware of the storm or the cracks beneath the water. Elise reached toward the surface. The final reflection awaited. The sky roared as thunder shook the trees around Mercer Lake. Rain began to fall, each drop a cold hammer against the earth. The new figure stepped forward, hood drawn tight against the storm. Her eyes flickered with both fear and determination. Elise watched from beneath the water, the crack in the mirror widening. Voices rose in a crescendo, a desperate chorus of echoes fighting to be free. The man in the water stirred, its form shifting in the turbulent depths. The final moment was coming. Elise stretched out her hands, ready to embrace or resist. The lake waited. The storm raged. And fate held its breath. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the trembling figure by the lake. Her eyes met the fractured reflection beneath the surface, Elise's eyes, glowing faintly. The storm's fury echoed the turmoil in her soul. A voice whispered in the wind. "Choose, Elise. Become the lake's keeper, or break the cycle and lose yourself forever." The water churned, tendrils rising like fingers reaching out. The new Elise hesitated, heart pounding. Memories flooded her, fragments of lives intertwined with the lake's endless hunger. With a scream, she plunged into the water. The surface swallowed her whole. Beneath, Elise reached out, fingers brushing the newcomers. The cycle paused, on the edge of eternity. Under the stormy sky, the water stilled. Elise and the newcomer floated in the abyss. The crack in the mirror closed slowly, sealing their fate. The voices fell silent. A calm settled over the lake. Elise's glowing eyes dimmed, the eternal watcher at peace, for now. The cycle was broken. Or perhaps, simply paused. Above, the storm cleared. The first light of dawn touched the water. And somewhere, deep beneath Mercer Lake, a whisper stirred. A new name. A new echo. The endless watch would continue.